Hey guys, Schmitty here. Listen, today I want to make a video about the basics of Genshin, and I'll tell you why. My interactions, of course, will be different than everybody else's, but my interactions in the Genshin community are majority with newer players or inexperienced players. Now, Genshin Impact has been out since September 28th, 2020. There are a good amount of players that are higher AR than me, that probably have better artifacts than me, that may know more about the game than me. It's safe to assume that there are going to be people that know more about the game at this point. This video is not directly aimed towards them, okay? I would say don't disregard, check out the talking points, and help me out, because if I miss something, add it in. But I feel like a lot of people in this game are new, or newer. And I personally don't see a lot of content out there that, anymore anyways. It started when it first came out, but it's kind of paused. I don't see as much content out there about what to focus on, what you need to make your Genshin account better, from a very basics level. So today I'm going to talk about that.
I think about this every day. I think about this all night long. I stay awake, not sleeping, because I'm thinking about this.
We're going to start off with the priorities of what you need to prioritize as far as invest your time in at the start of the game, towards the mid of the game, all the way till the end late game, where your priorities will change. The first thing on that is character levels and ascension. The most important thing about getting your account up is ascending your characters and leveling them up. Characters have passive talents that unlock at certain levels, and once you have ascended past that level is going to be level 20 and level 60. These are the two most important benchmarks to really see increase of damage. Take, for example, Ganyu. Extra 20% crit on her any charge attack and Frostplate Plumes after the first one. 5-second cooldown, can be reset multiple times. The first one is the only one that truly cannot get this benefit. Celestial Shower grants a 20% cryo damage bonus to active party members in the AoE. These are guaranteed boosts to your damage that you are missing out on if you're not fully ascending your characters to utilize this stuff, right? In the early game, while you're leveling up your account, it is very easy to get into the story mind frame and to not exactly farm as much, but you have so much time to farm for their Ascension materials, that being world bosses, flowers, and enemy drops, regular world enemy drops. For newer to beginners, you don't have to worry as much about the weekly bosses. That's going to come into effect while you're leveling your talents past 6, which will not be accessible until you are past that level 60 point. Character levels are the most important thing. Ascend your characters, level your characters, make sure that they're the strongest they can be, because that is passive stats that they cannot get rid of by changing artifacts. That is just standard stats, and that will increase your damage guaranteed. The second thing that I think everybody should focus on, and it's the menu that I'm currently in, talents. These are your 3 talents. So you have your auto attack talent, you have your elemental skill talent, and you have your elemental burst talent. Level your fucking talents. My characters, you can see, all have investment into their talents. Some are more important than others. Zhongli's auto attack is not as important as the other 2. Don't come at me for that. All right. Ganyu is an interesting case because all 3 of her talents are fairly good for her kit, right? Same with Ito. So if you have characters and you have talents and you're not leveling them up, level your talents up to the max potential you can until the next level. The focus for this is always level up and level the talents of your main DPS carry, because your supports and your sub DPSs, while their damage does matter in the long run, it is more important to get your primary focus DPS up first, because they're going to be, more often than not, the on-field carry and the one that's going to be doing the most time on field. And you're going to need them to have the extra bonus stats that come passively as you level up your character. HP, defense, base attack. Next priority is weapons. Level up your weapons, okay? That is main DPS, sub DPS, whoever. Level up your weapons. Focus on your primary DPS because, as I said, their stats are the most important. The supports will still be able to support in some capacity, and their damage is not as important as your main damage carries. Level up your main damage carries weapons, okay? You'll see that I have mine maxed out. I don't have all of them maxed out because I'm saving for a certain weapon that's coming out in a week, but after that, I am focusing on leveling them up as I go along, okay? This is important to get them to the max that you can, because this is going to bump up your damage a lot. And if you look, to ascend these, you are going to need resin material, but it's only one resin material, versus a character you have 2 to 3 different resin required materials, i.e. weekly bosses, world bosses, and your gemstones, okay, and the lower versions of that. Those are all resin required stuff. Your weapons only require 1. So it's a lot easier to farm for your weapons in resin wise than it is to farm for the other ones. Now, of course, weapons do need Mystic Enhancement ore. That can be found in the world, and if you are dedicated to farming it, you can get a lot. Okay, on to the next priority. And this is something that you cannot level up, but you need to make yourself familiar with. Elemental reactions. It is a guaranteed boost to your damage, and if when done properly, a very, very high boost to your damage. I'm going to go over this really quickly, but if there's enough want for a in-depth view on elemental reactions, what to do and everything, I am more than happy to do that. I just don't think that this is the place right now for it. But if there's a need for that, I will definitely delve into that. So, with the basics going forward, elemental resonance. Resonance is when you have more than two or more of the same element. You notice that I have cryo and geo. This is effect that happens. Most of the time, this affected by electro for 40% less of the time, not as important. This is what we're looking at right here. Increases crit rate against opponents that are frozen or affected by cryo by 15%. That's 15% increased crit rate for free, as long as you use a cryo attack beforehand. That's a guaranteed boost of damage. Enduring rock. Increases shield strength by 15. Again, not as important, but if they're protected by a shield, your damage is increased by 15%. That's everybody's damage is increased by 15%. And dealing damage to enemies will decrease their Geo res by 20% for 15 seconds. So, Geo is probably the best elemental resonance that you can have, because it affects all the elements and also gives an even bigger boost to their damage. And that's offset by their inability to trigger elemental reactions. And I'll go over that in a second. Pyro. Affected by cryo for 40% less time. Not as important. Increased attack by 25%. Very important. That is going to be a high increase of damage right off the bat. Hydro. Affected by pyro for 40% less of the time. Increases incoming healing by 30%. Not as effective, but it can be useful in certain situations. Animo. Decreases stamina consumption by 15%. Very important for the world if you're traveling around and you hate waiting and you want to be able to sprint faster. Increased movement speed by 10%. Again, overworld stuff. Shorten skill CDs by 5%. This is one of the only things in the game, besides one character ability, that can shorten CDs. Outside of events. Events will sometimes have this, but in the regular game, this is one of the only things that shorten skill CDs. Shortening skill CDs is the best buff to anything that you can have. Guaranteed. I will stand by that statement. Double Electro. Affected by Hydro for 40% less time. Superconduct, Overload, and Electrocharge have 100% to generate an electro-elemental particle. This seems like it's not really that great, because it doesn't increase your damage, but this increases the amount of times that you can get particles which charge your burst, which your burst is, more often than not, your burst is the highest damage part of your kit. So, although this does seem good on the surface, it is still applicable, and it is still good. All 4 elements. Increases all elemental res by 15%, physical res by 15%. This isn't as bad as I think people give it credit for. I think having a little bit of sustainability is good in the early to mid game. Late game, this is absolutely a non-factor. Elemental reactions. That is when 2 elements mix together and create a reaction, okay? If you press G or you go to your tutorial menu, G on PC, I don't know the menu options for PlayStation or mobile, but go into your tutorial menu. If you click on this tab right here, this has all elemental reactions. Give a quick read on this. This will give the basics of every elemental reaction, right? I'm going to go over these right now. Melt. That is when pyro meets cryo or cryo meets pyro. There are two different versions. There's melt and reverse melt. Melt is when you melt cryo. That is a 1.5 multiplier to your damage right off the bat. Whatever melts, that is increased by 1.5%. That's a huge bonus of damage. And if you're in the early game and you're struggling with content, having that burst of damage is important. Reverse melt. That is when cryo meets pyro. That is a 2 times damage increase. Even more so. Hey, sorry guys, really quick. Pyro to cryo is 2 times. Cryo to pyro is 1.5. Sorry, I just noticed that in editing. Vaporize. That is pyro to hydro. Vaporizing pyro to hydro is a 1.5 multiplier. So that is when hydro is applied to the enemy and you use pyro. Again, another boost, huge boost of damage. Reverse vaporize. That is when hydro is applied to pyro. That is a 2 times increase. These are huge multipliers to your damage, literally doubling your damage. It is insane to think about if you apply it in the correct spot. And this is how damage showcases are done. You cannot do this amount of damage without the proper elemental reactions. Freeze. That is when cryo or hydro are applied to each other. There is no inherent bonus damage. This is a CC elemental reaction. And it is the same effect whether you apply cryo to hydro or hydro to cryo. Superconduct. This is when cryo or electro are applied to the enemy. Again, just like freeze, does not matter which one is applied first. Okay, superconduct increases your physical damage for characters like Eula, Razor, and if you're a little bit of a memer, just kidding, it's actually really good and I'm thinking about building it to playtest myself. DPS Physical Special. These 3 characters, along with some others, mainly utilize superconduct, and their elements are one part of the 2 chain to make superconduct. This is a guaranteed bonus or boost to your damage because it lowers the defense percent by a certain marker of the enemies to physical damage. This is very important for people like specifically Eula and Razor because they rely heavily on their physical damage. Eula being the most heavily because of her ultimate being physical damage as well. Electrocharge. That is when Electro meets Hydro or vice versa. Electrocharge does a set amount of damage based on your character level. This is another important reason to level your characters up, because certain elemental reactions will scale with your character level. Overload. That is Electro to Pyro or vice versa. This creates an explosion of damage, which is based on character level, and it blows smaller enemies away. Okay, this is good for CC, but it's also not good if you want to keep enemies grouped, because you will spread them out. So, this one, in the early game, and to the mid game, is very useful, because you're not going to be doing as much damage when you're early to mid game, as you will late game, where it starts to drop off. Overload is very good early, and it starts to scale down as you go into the late game. So, don't disregard this as a bad reaction. When you're building your account and when you're leveling your account and when you're in the newer game content, overload still is a damage increase, and I do suggest you utilize it when possible. Crystallize. That is when Geo reacts with any other element besides Anemo. This will create an elemental particle, which will drop on the field. An elemental crystal, excuse me. This will generate an elemental crystal that'll drop on the field. When you pick this up, you will gain a shield. That's still pretty good. But the important thing to note is when you pick this up, if you have 2 Geos in your team, your Geo Resonance will activate because you have a shield on. So it does have synergy with its own elemental resonance, but it doesn't significantly impact your damage from the get-go. It does impact your survivability. So on one hand, I do think it's good. On the other hand, it can be underwhelming at times. Swirl. Swirl is a anemo-only elemental reaction, and it swirls an element on there. This does set damage based on character level. This is also very impactful once you start getting artifact sets will contribute to, i.e. Viridis and Venerer. So towards the later parts of the mid to end game, you will start to realize that Swirl is one of the best elemental reactions, if not the best elemental reaction, when paired with Viridis and Venerer. Important thing to note about elemental reactions. This is also affected by your character's elemental mastery. The higher a character's elemental mastery, the stronger the element that can be released. This affects all elements, whereas your HP will only affect this bottom portion: Overload, Superconductor, Electrocharge, Shatter, Swirl, increase damage absorption through Crystallize. Okay. This will also affect Vaporize and Melt. So Vaporize and Melt do not scale based off your character level. These do, but Elemental Mastery increases these. Side note, I forgot to talk about Shatter because I honestly forgot it was a reaction. Shatter is when you use physical damage and apply it to a frozen enemy. It will do a percent amount of damage based on your character level and Elemental Mastery. It's cool, but you get rid of the freeze effect and you get rid of the CC effect, which is also not cool. So I think this is the most underwhelming elemental reaction. I wouldn't worry too much about that. I wouldn't placate towards that. Now, if you end up freezing enemy and shattering it and doing extra damage, cool, good job. Don't avoid using physical damage or Geo when you do that, but it's highly underwhelming. It is important to build elemental mastery on characters that rely on elemental mastery. I can go over elemental mastery in a longer form video. There is so much to talk about besides just elemental reactions, because elemental mastery itself scales differently with characters. So, if that's something you want to hear about, let me know in the comments. I'm more than happy to make a video on that. The last priority to leveling your account: artifacts. You see a bunch of content creators in the late to end game constantly farming artifacts for the best set. You may watch your creators leveling up artifacts and getting good drops and seeing all these wonderful numbers. It's not a lie. Those do exist. I do have some of those, but for the most part, it is an absolute lie. Artifact rolling is pure RNG, right? Artifacts may give you the most damage in your kit, but it is not guaranteed damage. You can farm for 2 months for an artifact set and get absolutely nothing to upgrade or nothing 100% usable. Whereas you could just level up your talents and get that guaranteed increase and then worry about artifacts later. You know, if you're in Genshin for the longer run, right? If you enjoy playing this game, even if you play casual, you will get to the end game at some point in Genshin. You will get to this point where you are more worried about artifact farming than you're worried about leveling your characters up. You may have a certain team that is already well built and you now want artifacts for them because you want to start challenging the Abyss. That's perfectly fine. At that point, farm artifacts. But until then, don't use a ton of resin on artifacts trying to get wonderful sets. If you do use resin on artifacts, when you don't have a guaranteed 5-drop, I would say literally take anything that is that set if that's what you're looking for. A big artifact set that is, I would say you could probably farm this. If you have an animal character, Sucrose, Kazuha, Venti, if you have one of these characters and you want, oh, wrong domain, sorry. If you have one of these characters and you want to utilize the Viridescent Veteran set, I'm not going to say don't farm this set because this is insane amount of damage increase once you get a 4-piece set. But I will tell you, do not try for the perfect set until you can get 5-star artifacts, because it will be a huge waste of resin in the long run that you can use to get guaranteed bumps to your character. To summarize, listen, Genshin is a for fun game in my mind, right? In my mind, this is a completely 100%, I play this for fun, I play this because I enjoy this, I don't play this because it's the most challenging game in the world and I need my fix. That being said, clearing content's also fun. I'm not going to disregard that. Clearing content is very fun. Okay, and I want to 36-star the Abyss. I want to be able to clear all the new content that comes out. And I generally don't want to struggle too much with clearing the basic content. So leveling up my account and getting good artifacts is still important to me, even though I play this for fun, right? It's all about your priorities in the game. It's all about where you decide to go with this. I just wanted to leave a little bit of information to have maybe help a couple people get kickstarted, or maybe give a couple people a little bit of a priority that they may not have had without this, you know, because this is a vast game. There's lots of moving parts to this. There's a whole lot going on. And without anybody to tell you this stuff, honestly, I don't think Genshin really delves into it too much. You know, there's a lot of intricacies that are a little bit hidden, which personally I find totally enjoyable. But other people might not discover that, so I want to bring that to you guys. But anyways, if you guys like the content, please leave a like. leave a comment, let me know if there's something that I talked about in this video that I'm either wrong on, you want more information on, or you have something to add. Leave a comment, let me know. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day.